Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidos a este ya quinto episodio de CoopsTV. Yo soy Claudia Cano, presentadora, periodista, y este formato llega a ustedes por medio del proyecto Cops for Dev. Sabemos que la pandemia del COVID-19 ha puesto de relieve los continuos desafíos que enfrenta el mundo desarrollado para satisfacer las crecientes necesidades de nuestra civilización y la inequidad en la atención médica que enfrentan los países de bajos ingresos mientras luchan por expandir la cobertura de salud. Es precisamente por esto que quisimos dedicar este episodio y extender nuestro más sincero pésame por las miles de víctimas por el COVID-19, así como nuestras muestras de afecto a las familias y conocidos. Definitivamente creemos que una de las formas de apoyarnos y fortalecernos será rindiendo un homenaje a los compañeros que hemos perdido y que no queremos olvidar. Nos sumamos entonces a este reconocimiento al cuerpo médico que ha entregado hasta la vida misma. Se ha evidenciado que las cooperativas de salud se encuentran en una posición única para ayudar a los países a alcanzar el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 3, que les queremos recordar que tiene como objetivo garantizar una vida sana y promover el bienestar para todos en todas las edades. Y nos llena en este momento de orgullo tener en nuestro continente y en nuestra membresía al que podemos definir como el mayor sistema cooperativo de trabajo médico del mundo y la mayor red de asistencia médica de Brasil. Quiero hablarles de algunas cifras porque cuenta con 342 cooperativas, 117,000 médicos colaboradores, 18 millones de beneficiarios, 2.405 hospitales acreditados y 131 hospitales propios. Esto es Unimed, la marca más confiable de su sector. Por eso quisimos invitar al doctor Omar Alhamra Jr., presidente de Unimed do Brasil. Doctor Alhamra, bienvenido a este formato de CoopsTV y me gustaría preguntarle qué reflexiones concluye sobre esta pandemia global de gran magnitud que vivimos, donde los gobiernos de distintos países y organizaciones internacionales no estaban preparados para responder a esto. Unimed representa un referente que entendió el derecho a la salud y cómo esta organización Unimed contribuye a fortalecer y garantizar este derecho en Brasil, a cooperar en las Américas e incluso en todo el mundo.
Bom dia a todos. É com muita satisfação que a gente participa dessa reunião. A pandemia do Covid-19 colocou à prova o sistema de saúde em todo o mundo e nem todos se saíram bem. A crise evidenciou distorções na organização dos sistemas. Por exemplo, a ênfase nos cuidados hospitalares e uma baixa integração com os níveis de atenção primária. A crise também acentuou desigualdades no acesso à saúde, tanto em escala global, entre os países, como dentro de cada país. Essa situação nos mostra que ainda precisamos evoluir na garantia do acesso à saúde para todos, como princípio e direito de cidadania. Da mesma forma, fica evidente que precisamos transformar o sistema na direção do que é valor em saúde, a integração dos cuidados, a coordenação da jornada assistencial e incentivos atrelados a melhores resultados em termos de recuperação da saúde e bem-estar. No Brasil, nós temos o SUS, o nosso Sistema Único de Saúde, um dos maiores sistemas públicos universalizados do mundo. E o papel do SUS foi e tem sido decisivo no enfrentamento da pandemia, inclusive na garantia da coesão social. Adicionalmente, a saúde suplementar, os planos e seguros privados de saúde, responde pelo cuidado de 48 milhões de brasileiros, o que representa quase um quarto de toda a nossa população. E temos cumprido o nosso papel, garantindo as coberturas e evitando a sobrecarga e o colapso da rede pública. De modo especial, acredito que o cooperativismo médico oferece uma resposta não apenas eficaz, quanto de interesse social, na direção de mais acesso à saúde, com qualidade e a custos sustentáveis. Basta vermos a própria história do sistema Unimed no Brasil. Em 2021, completamos 50 anos do início de nossa expansão pelo país. A primeira Unimed foi fundada em 1967 e entre 70 e 71, 33 Unimedes foram criadas em diversas regiões do país. Hoje somos 342 cooperativas e estamos presentes em 84% dos municípios brasileiros. desde as capitais até as cidades de pequeno porte no interior do país. Ao longo desse período, nossas cooperativas ajudaram a fixar os médicos nessas localidades e a viabilizar financeiramente as redes de prestadores locais. Dessa forma, a Unimed tem contribuído para interiorizar uma assistência médica de qualidade, o que se mostrou absolutamente imprescindível nessa crise. Somos responsáveis pelo cuidado de 18 milhões de clientes. Para citar alguns exemplos de como nossas cooperativas têm atuado na linha de frente dessa pandemia, são mais de 600 iniciativas locais para ampliar e garantir a capacidade de atendimento aos nossos clientes. Ampliamos em pelo menos 54% a oferta de leitos na rede própria e abrimos 11 hospitais de campanha. Sem contar a expansão da telemedicina, abertura de unidades ambulatoriais, aquisição de equipamentos e insumos e a contratação de profissionais de saúde. Seguindo o princípio de envolvimento com a comunidade e de responsabilidade social, as Unimedes têm uma profunda vinculação com as comunidades onde estão inseridas. Atualmente, nossas cooperativas beneficiam cerca de 8 milhões de pessoas em projetos sociais, ambientais e culturais. Em 2020, a mobilização dos nossos institutos captou mais de 4 milhões de reais, que foram destinados a 45 instituições e 22 mil famílias em diferentes estados do país. Seguimos trabalhando, de modo que tenho 40 anos de vida cooperativa na Unimed. E atravessar essa pandemia só fortaleceu minha convicção no modelo cooperativista, especialmente na saúde. A cooperação de forma ampla em todos os campos, desde a ciência à solidariedade social, será o caminho para sairmos da crise y reconstruirnos melhor juntos. Muito obrigado.
Las cooperativas de salud desarrollan su actividad en diferentes subsectores como la asistencia sanitaria primaria y especializada, la gestión de hospitales y establecimientos de salud, la promoción de salud, prevención, la alfabetización sanitaria o la prestación de servicios sociales vinculados a la salud. Es por eso que le damos paso a Coprofesionales Panamá para que sean ellos quienes nos cuenten esta experiencia.
Somos una cooperativa panameña que nació hace 51 años, en enero de 1970, producto de la necesidad de los médicos por alcanzar una mejor calidad de vida al momento de jubilarse, cuestión que en aquella época no era posible. De 112 asociados en nuestros comienzos, hoy somos más de 10.000 a nivel nacional, una de las más grandes y robustas instituciones cooperativas del país, conocida como la Cooperativa de Médicos. Marzo de 2020 marca un antes y un después. Aunque el después aún no termina. Algunas de nuestras contribuciones durante la pandemia. Conformamos el Comité COVID-19 a nivel nacional. Implementamos medidas de bioseguridad para nuestros asociados y para nuestros colaboradores, adaptándonos a las nuevas necesidades. Donamos insumos, equipos médicos e hicimos aportes económicos. Instituciones de salud y otras entidades sin fines de lucro fueron impactadas positivamente a nivel nacional. Nuestras redes sociales. Abrimos un espacio para brindarle a nuestros asociados y seguidores información importante en temas de salud a través de live. Enseñanzas de la pandemia. Resiliencia, solidaridad, adaptación, paciencia. Retos: mantener la seguridad financiera de nuestra membresía hasta la recuperación del sector económico, garantizar la disponibilidad de los productos y servicios para nuestra membresía, mejora continua de nuestros procesos para beneficio de nuestros asociados. Nuestro agradecimiento a todos los médicos que alrededor del mundo están haciendo la diferencia en la vida de miles de personas, y para los que ya no están con nosotros, nuestra oración.
Una vez más, gracias a quienes han difundido y compartido este formato. Nosotros esperamos continuar exaltando el espíritu cooperativo y cómo este trabaja de la mano por defender los derechos civiles. En esta ocasión tenemos un caso excepcional. Estamos con Cornelius Blendin, director ejecutivo de la Federación de Cooperativas del Sur de NCBA CLUSA. Somos conscientes del fuerte vínculo que existe entre el movimiento cooperativo y el movimiento por los derechos civiles, especialmente en los años 60, dado a las personas excluidas, en particular los afroamericanos, una voz digna y con mayor participación en la sociedad. Como resultado de esto, y bajo la guerra contra la pobreza del gobierno de los Estados Unidos, NCBA CLUSA lideró un proyecto piloto dando voz a los excluidos y estableciendo en 1967 su Federación de Cooperativas del Sur. Esto ocurrió solo 2 años después de las marchas de Selma en Montgomery, en Alabama. 3 años después del discurso, recuerdan todos ustedes, Tengo un sueño, de Martin Luther King. El ex senador John Lewis, entre otros, pues ha sido una de las personas claves para usted en este sentido. ¿Podría entonces contarnos un poco más sobre esta época, especialmente en los países del sur de los Estados Unidos?
Well, Danilo, first of all, thank you, my friend, for the introduction, and thank you all, you and your team, for doing this type of show. I think it's important for us, for the world to know how important the cooperative movement. I'm the executive director of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund, and I'm also a director on the board of NCBA CLUSA. So they're 2 different organizations, but NCBA CLUSA was the face of the cooperative movement for us at that time. That was our link, that was our understanding of the cooperative movement, our organization back in the 60s. NCBA CLUSA, well, CLUSA at that time, the Credit Union League of the USA, supported the efforts of economically poor people from all across the South, their efforts in organizing of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives in 1967. And the Federation, which became a powerful voice, as you mentioned, for those who were excluded and oppressed in the rural South. CLUSA at that time supported the meeting of cooperatives that came together all over the South, that started hearing about each other and the work that was going on in the struggle, their common struggle. So there was a meeting where they came together in a place called Mount Beulah, Mississippi, and CLUSA was one of those organizations that supported that original meeting back in 1966. So during the heart of the civil rights movement. And that meeting was about discussing an idea of a federation. An idea of all these limited resource cooperatives, these cooperatives of economically poor people, Black people all over the South, who were being oppressed, who were being discriminated against, an idea of them coming together to work together. And so they also supported that meeting in 1967, a year later, when the Federation of Southern Cooperatives was actually chartered in Atlanta, Georgia. CLUSA also provided technical support and assistance during the organizing and formative years of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And one of the most important things, as you mentioned, back then, they provided some seed money. CLUSA got a grant from the Office of Economic Opportunity, OEO at that time, which was a part of the government's war on poverty. And that money was used for the initial setup of the first office building in Atlanta back in 1967. And so the first executive director of the organization, Mr. Charles Prejean, moved his family to Atlanta and opened up an office for the organization. And it was from that support. So CLUSA, the face of the cooperative movement, for us, for Black folks in the South during that time, again played a huge role in organizing an organization that became the voice of Black folks in the South, especially the rural South, and using the cooperative movement, using the cooperative model to connect with the civil rights movement to really do something special, something that was needed to create these vehicles of necessity, these vehicles that allowed for a lot of progress during that time. And again, that time, the 60s, was a time of turbulence in our country. And it was a very challenging time for African American people all over the country, but especially in the South. And so there was a lot of racial discrimination. Discrimination was the norm during that time. There was economic oppression of Black people, and it was systemic, and there was segregation, and segregation was the law of the land at that time. So the civil rights movement was a decades-long campaign to end racial discrimination, to end segregation. And it was the intersection of that movement, the civil rights movement, and the cooperative movement that really started dealing with a lot of the economic oppression. It was timely for those two movements to collide, if you will. But that collision is what created the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. The cooperative movement allowed Black folks to address that economic oppression. It was a tool used during boycotts. So when civil rights organizations and organizers would organize these boycotts of these mainstream businesses and other entities that perpetuated segregation and discrimination, boycotts were the main tool. But Black folks in that time and other folks had to have an alternative. And these cooperatives gave them an alternative. They were able to build cooperative grocery stores and other cooperative businesses that they could support the community and families during those times. But cooperatives also were a vehicle for building independent Black businesses and also community ownership. So all these things allowed the civil rights movement to fledge, to prosper because of that economic side of it. So it was also, so not only did it deal with or address discrimination and segregation, it also allowed for the civil rights movement to address economic oppression in a lot of cases. And again, CLUSA was the face of the cooperative movement at that time for us, for our organization, for Black folks during the 60s. But this cooperative movement happened long before that as well. There was a lot of work 30, 40 years before, and this tool was being used. So again, the cooperative movement was an important movement, important tool for Black folks in this country, in our country, the United States, all the way up to and especially during the civil rights movement. And it allowed, again, for this organization, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, to be chartered and to flourish and to really become a strong voice for many folks in the South and especially in rural communities. And this still goes on to today. There's challenges we have today where it's shown that the cooperative movement is a solution to many of the challenges in not only in Black communities, but in economically poor communities all around the country. Whether it be dealing with housing issues, whether it's dealing with food shortages or food crisis, what we call food deserts all over the country, whether dealing with the workers' movement to allow workers to pull together to create cooperatives. It allows for a number of things. It's a luxury in many communities, but it's a necessity in those economically oppressed and limited resource communities. And until today, we're dealing with a lot of challenges that challenge civil rights issues around our country. One particular is looking at land rights. Many Black folks don't have secure title to their land, which creates a civil rights issue because they can't access many of the government services that are prevalent and needed today. And this cooperative movement provides solutions even to those issues around land. So to answer your question directly, Danilo, the cooperative movement is still prevalent today, and it still coincides with the civil rights movement as we know it today. Looks a lot different from the 60s, but there are a lot of the still underlying factors, and we struggle in our country to deal with those issues regularly, but we're addressing them, we're struggling with them, and the cooperative movement is a big part of that struggle, a big part of those solutions, we think.